Good evening and welcome to Strictly Speaking. My name is Joshua Reaves. I'm the Director of University Theater here at NC State. And we're so happy you're joining us for our 26th episode of the series. I want to say thank you for all who tuned in and support the arts of supporting NC State and supporting University Theater. Our guest tonight is lighting designer and head of the M.F.A. lighting program at my personal alma mater, the University of Cincinnati College Conservatory of Music, Miss SHARON HUIZINGA. SHARON, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
Right. We really want to hear from you, to hear what you want to know about when it comes to lighting, when it comes to education, when it comes to pretty much anything you want to ask SHARON, especially about some tiny houses. We'll get to that later in the evening. So to start off, SHARON, as we do for every of our Strictly Speaking, we always ask our guests, what does it mean, in your own words, to be a lighting designer? And for you also, what does it mean to be a lighting programmer?
Great question. So for me, to be a lighting designer is to be a translator. And that means taking something that is an emotional experience. I think that people come to see anything, whether it's dance or a rock concert or an opera, or to look at a beautifully lit building because they want to be moved. They want to have some kind of, they want to feel something. And when I take that on, I'm saying, oh, then my job is to translate an emotional experience into a visual medium and create something through light that invites the audience or invites the people watching, in the case of something like architecture, into a space where they're going to have this emotional experience. So I primarily view that the job of lighting design as one of translation. And the job of a programmer moves completely to the opposite side of the brain. And it is, largely speaking, data management and facilitation of someone else's job of translating emotion into a visual medium. So the programming job is as close to inhabiting another person's brain as I've ever come. Because in order to be really good at that, you have to be inside the designer's mind. And that as they're finishing the sentence of, could you put that light at that percent in that color, it is happening as they speak it. And in order to do that, there has to be a little bit of synergy between yourself and the designer, and intense presence, intense single pointed focus. Yes.
So it sounds like lighting design is the translation of art into visual form, and perhaps programming is the translation of someone's translation into computer and data form. It sounds like that's what you're doing.
Yeah, it can, or not even, it's a manifestation, right? To take an idea, it doesn't actually exist on stage. It has to go through all of this technology to actually exist. We have to pick some lights. We have to hang them in a certain spot. We need to make a lighting console, turn them on in the time we want to turn them on. And that is it's almost like a gatekeeper role as a programmer, that you're saying, hey, I'm going to take that idea that's in your brain and turn it into reality on stage.
Great. And let me ask you, which do you prefer, or do you have a preference for one of the two types of jobs?
I don't actually. I really, really have jumped back and forth between those two jobs, and also, generally speaking, right brain, left brain activities in my career, because there is a bunch of joy to be felt from both of those things. And I do notice when I've spent too long on one side, I really need to, right now, I'm in a very administrative reality because COVID and running a university program, and there's lots of grant writing and organization and curriculum development. And I can feel the antsiness that comes from not having access to the creative side of myself in its time. And then sometimes I've spent too much time on the creative side, and I can feel myself almost getting floaty. Like I need to do something that grounds me back down into reality again, plug in some gear and make some stuff work. So I also find the programming job to be one where I get to inhabit another designer's creative process in a very intimate way. And that informs my own design choices in a massive way. I mean, to be able to really know how Hugh Vanstone
Mm.
conceptualized, designed, realized Shrek the Musical, not just hearing about it, but for months being inside of that process, of course, that's like a massive benefit to my own design process.
Awesome. And if I could ask you, has there been a like? Can you point to one single thing that you may have picked up along the way and happening someone else's brain that you've now put into your own work?
A single thing. I don't
Yeah,
know
or like
if I
what's
can
that
narrow
big
it
thing that
down.
like I learned this one thing about blah. What was
Yeah. Okay, I can get it down to two
it?
things.
Okay. Okay.
From Hugh Vanstone, his approach to how to organize and utilize moving lights for a Broadway musical is something that I've kept forever. So prior to interacting with him, I was probably like many people separating things out quite a bit. Like I'll create a data management structure that deals with pan and tilt,
Hmm.
and then a separate data management structure that deals with the color, and a separate one that deals with any gobos or patterns inside. And it's a lot of levels of management. And he would say, no, we're in theater. We just want it all to look one way. Let's address it as a system that has all the information in it, except for color and intensity. And so he would have maybe 5 very generic washes that he did with moving lights that showed up in every single scene, but maybe we'll change the focus a little bit here, change the color a little bit here. And I realized at the end, I'm like, you got millions of looks out of what came down to 5 presets, 5 like building blocks. And that was unbelievably efficient and created so much time for creativity. And the other one that I really learned was from Rob Sondergaard, who is the designer for the 2010 Paralympic opening ceremonies. And I was one of 2 programmers working on that. And at first I felt a little like, am I in over my head? There's 600 moving lights hanging in the air. Like how am I going to deal with this? And then realizing, oh, this is no more complicated than having 10. We're just turning all 50 of those on at the same time.
Mm.
And tipping them up and turning them into a color and fanning them across the audience. We're never actually going in and adjusting every single one of those by themselves. So that, those were 2 really, really great downloads about how to deal with moving lights. And every show now has so much technology on it. It's easy to drown in the technology.
Of course, yeah. And speaking of the technology, and well, you know what? Let me back up. How did you get started in the lighting field or in art or theater or live performance?
Ah, I started as an actor, is the short answer. I actually went to Interlochen Arts Academy on an acting scholarship. And at some point, I realized I wasn't that great at it. I was okay. And right around the time that realization was happening, they brought in a guest artist who was a Broadway actor and had a very nice story about that. And one of the things that individual said is, look, all of you, if there's anything else that you can envision yourself doing other than acting, you should do that, because this is a really hard road to walk. And it is, if you will die by doing something else, then you need to do this. But if you can see yourself doing something else, this is too hard. You're not going to want to see it through for 20 years of rejections. And I remember thinking, oh, I can think of 5 things right now that I'd be happy doing. And that sounds terrible. And I immediately switched to the costume shop. I was like, I think those people might be nuts, and I want to come in here and sew costumes with you all. And that was it. That kind of started it. It was like, oh, okay, yeah, technical theater. I hadn't really thought about it before. Like many people in high school, were not necessarily exposed to anything behind the scenes. And from costume design, I moved into scenic design. And for quite a while, I was a scenic painter for large scale drops for ballet. And then at a certain point, I had to choose between scenic painting and lighting. They were both evolving at similar paces in my career trajectory, but they're very different mental spaces, and they're too hard to flip between. One is fairly solitary and kind of a more feminine energy, if you will, and the other is more gear and rowdy and metal and moving equipment around. So I was finding it too hard to do one thing one day and then flip to another gig doing the other thing another day. So by the time I left graduate school, I was calling myself a lighting designer. I had entered as a scenic designer and scenic painter, and by the time I left, I was a lighting designer.
Awesome. Well, the question I was starting to ask before I wanted to hear how you got started was, how has the technology evolved over your time when you first started out to where it is now? And it's more to the point, how has that influenced the artistic expression, or has it?
I feel in lighting that the technology never stops. Like if I check out for maybe I can manage to check out for 4 months, maybe 6, and not have and I'm still really current. But wow, if I choose to go do something else for a year or two and come back, there's a lot on the table to learn to be current again. So I feel like that is one of the driving things about lighting, that there is a flow of constant change in terms of technology, which people can be involved in or not to varying degrees depending on preference. Um, there's also a flow of technology available to be completely immersed in. And sometimes that can get very distracting. And you find, oh, I've become enamored of some technology and I've totally lost track of storytelling. So there's a little bit of back and forth with that. And I can only speak to my experience. I like technology, but I'm not really a gearhead. It usually comes from like, oh, I want to be able to do that. How
Ah,
can I do that? Hasn't anyone invented something to be able to do that yet? Hey, how's everyone else doing that? Oh, there's a thing that can do that.
mhm.
But without the doing that, it's super dry. I can't take it in, which is many people feel differently about that. They can take in technology for technology's sake. Um, I think the biggest changes that we're seeing in North America, at least, is that media is in everything. There's no
Yeah.
one's figured out exactly what we want to call this yet, but let's say projection design, which doesn't always involve projectors. That's just pretty standard now, I think.
It really
And
is.
it's something that I'm putting in curriculum here. But then you go to Europe and you're still having conversations about, I don't know about this LED technology. Not
Mm.
sure that that's a keeper. Like, oh, that's interesting. So it's also depends on where you are in the world, which technological conversation is happening.
Mm. Well, okay. So you've mentioned of working in numerous places in the world, in fact, and you actually have a U.S. and Canadian and Dutch citizenship. What are some of the major differences in the live entertainment? I know you just mentioned one, but do you find working outside the U.S. very different than working within the U.S. and how?
Yeah, I'll speak to like a Northern European versus American thing first, and then a Canadian versus American. So the art structure in Europe is fundamentally different in that, my experiences with Northern Europe, the Nordics, Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, France, that kind of, I don't know so much about what's going on in Italy, for instance. But the structure there is that the society as a whole has decided the arts are fundamentally important to have a society. So that means that something like the Dutch National Opera has a staff of 600 people. That includes all the ballet dancers, that includes 6 lighting programmers,
Mm.
that includes a video team, and everybody has what they would refer to as a permanent contract. And the closest we have to that in the United States is a tenured university position. That when you start with them, they'll say, okay, we're going to give you a 1-year contract. And at the end of the 1-year contract, we're going to give you another 1-year contract. And at the end of that, you have a permanent contract, which means you're basically employed for life or
Wow.
until you choose to leave. So that system is so different than a freelance profit driven system. So the profit driven freelance system, I think, in a way, keeps people honest because you can't ever really slip. You can't have an off day. You can have like 1 or 2 off shows in your career, but you better not make a habit of it. But at the same time, there's a lot of fear in there. And the profit-driven model in America drives artistic choices for what people are producing, which feels a bit like tail wagging the dog.
Mm-hmm.
And the European model is no, none of this needs to be profit driven. We want to do this because it is something that would be incredible to create.
Mm-hmm.
It would be an amazing addition to this society that we've created as a whole. This is something really important or worth investigating. And it's okay if it doesn't work. It can be a flop if it was still worth like, hey, we tried that. We tried this amazing thing. We tried to tell this phenomenal story. By example, one of the productions I was involved in Amsterdam with the Dutch National Opera was the production of Karl Stockhausen's Auslicht. And if anyone's into like electronic dance music, that man was the godfather of it. Super cool guy. So he wrote an opera that is a 7-day opera, 7 like 6-hour operas that are meant to happen over 7 days. One of them includes the helicopter quartet, which needs 4 helicopters that are very specific helicopters because the rotor makes a specific noise and a string quartet goes up in them and plays. And, all of this is just unbelievably complicated to pull off. And who in their right mind would produce a 7-day opera? Because like, no, wait, people aren't going to come. That won't be profitable. But that wasn't in anyone's mind as a question. They were like, we should do this because we can. And this is going to be amazing. And who else has the resources and the will to produce something like this? And it was a phenomenal experience. Wow. So that's a big difference. Canada to the United States, Canada's much smaller, not territory-wise, but certainly population-wise. So people are more likely to wear multiple hats. You're going to be the production manager and the lighting director on a tour. And I find that people are pretty nimble about switching roles. You can't have a whole career as a dimmer technician on a rock concert circuit in Canada. You're going to have 1 gig every 2 years. It's not big enough. Yeah. So that's a big difference. There's more specialization possible in the United States because the market is much bigger.
All right. Well, hey, everyone, don't forget, we have the Q&A open, so please throw those questions out there. Larissa, Ron, Emily, go ahead and ask away. So we asked about which do you prefer more, programming or designing. I do want to hear a bit about your programming. You have done a specific show, Shrek, the musical. And can you talk to us about that experience of programming a Broadway show?
Yeah. What an interesting question. It's almost too vague. Is there something in particular?
First off, how did you get involved with programming it? And
okay.
What was and then also like, what was that process? How long did you tech? And like, what was the actual, what was it like to be on a Broadway show, on a Tony nominated show, and working with such a great designer?
Sure. So the how did I get involved part was that I was doing, right out of graduate school, I was doing a lot of concert touring. So I was going out with Dido, and there was a stint with Coldplay and Travis, and I was working for a lighting rental company, Christie Lights, and they supplied a lot of tours. And at a certain point, I started thinking, I'd really like to be on the road less. And I always had a thing about New York. It's like, it's a great city. I resonate a lot with the city and wanted to live there. And of course, who doesn't want to work on Broadway? So I just was telling everyone, hey, I think I would like to move to New York. And there were a number of people I was working for who were very gracious and said, well, if you want to move to New York, every time you're there, you should give these 4 people comp tickets. I was like, okay. And those 4 people included, oh my gosh, now I can't remember, the IATSE Colleen Stewart at Lincoln Center Jazz, Phil, but I can't remember his last name. Lee Magadini, who ran High End and Verilight, very involved in these major lighting companies, and a handful of other people who, by the time I was ready to move, we knew each other. And they knew me as the person who, every time I rolled into town, they got comp tickets to see Diana Krall live at Radio City Music Hall. So there was also a good feeling towards me. And they were incredible, to be honest, Joshua. I landed in New York. Lee Magadini said, why don't you come be my roommate? You can come live with me and use my car whenever you want. And I've set you up meetings with the top 10 Broadway lighting designers over the next 2 weeks. Here's your agenda. So I just walked in and met a ton of people and got driven around to all the lighting shops. And she also said, what do you want to do here? And I said, oh, I don't know. I hadn't thought about that. And she said, oh, that's a terrible answer. You can't tell anyone that. I think I had just gotten into yoga. I think I said, I just want to be of service to my community. And she's like, New Yorkers are going to hate that. Come up with something better than that. It was stupid. And she said, do you know lighting consoles? I said, yeah, I know lighting consoles. I thought I did. And she said, you should be a programmer. You can make a bunch of money. It's a great job. It's like, okay. So I ended up programming a couple of things, smaller things like in Philadelphia, and discovering, oh, I did not know at all what I was talking about. And that's one of the things that I think is really important for students is to get time on headset with someone, a designer actually calling that, because it's the only way you'll never ask yourself to do something you don't know how to do on a lighting console. So you really need to be with someone who's asking you things you don't know how to do to uncover all your weak areas. So I did a couple of those that really uncovered some weak areas. And then Laura Frank, who's the godmother of Broadway programming, one of the very remarkable women in our industry. She called and said, hey, I'm programming media servers for Shrek. We're looking for a lighting programmer. I got your name from Lee Magadini. Can you tell me what you've worked on? And can you send me some of your show files? And so I sent her a couple show files and she was like, oh, you've done like 600 cues for Mike Baldessari. You're going to be fine. And that was it. They took me on and I was terrified. I mean, it was like, wow, this is kind of a big deal. There was 170 moving lights on it. At the time, that seemed really big. That's probably not even a big rig anymore. But it was great. And Hugh Vanstone is probably one of the kindest human beings on the planet. And Philip Rosenberg was his associate, who is a close runner-up. And that team together, they don't prescribe to, basically when people are under stress, they go any number of places. And one of the places people can go is a very shouty, abusive place. And, there's a bunch of that around in our industry. And those two never go there, never, ever. And so they create an environment that's tranquil and calm and conducive to everyone doing their best work, quite frankly. And it was about a 6-month tech process in Seattle. We were in tech rehearsals for 6 months. I had just finished a yoga teacher training, and Laura and I would practice yoga every lunch break in the upper lobby of the Fifth Avenue Theater in Seattle, which was great. We got the follow spot guys sometimes. And then we moved to Broadway. And by that time, we were all bonded. We were a family. I was well past the stage of being terrified. I knew that it was going well. But yeah, I mean, one thing I love to say to people is fear and excitement are basically the same emotion. So just reframe the fear and move forward. It's not a reason to not do things. I'm not speaking about jumping off cliffs or confronting, armed insurgents or anything. I'm talking more internal, personal fear. Should I do that show or not kind of fear.
Well, okay. That sounds like an exciting project. I would like to know, was that your most exciting project to date, or what is your most favorite project to date?
Yeah, there's different styles of favorite. So if you're talking about like the creation of a personal artistic vision about something, my favorite project is actually a production of Mary's Wedding in a small theater in Saskatchewan, where, opening night, we all looked at each other and we said, we just created magic. There was not a single element out of step. From actors, sound, lighting, costumes, the script. Oh my God, it was a transcendently beautiful, cohesive, fully realized production. And I think we only get a few of those in a lifetime where it comes together to the point that it is actually magical. So for that style of thing, that was my favorite. For the like bonding of a group of people doing cool stuff and art, probably my favorite was a Diana Krall tour that went on for 18 months. Like we lapped the world twice with the same crew.
Mm-hmm.
And by the end of that 18 months, we had had so many wonderful adventures, like hiking in Argentina and going out for incredible, everyone had had multiple birthdays. We'd celebrated across Japan. We had been to everyone's home because as we went around the world, we could go check out the production manager's house in Australia. We could see my house in Canada. So that was a level of bonding and adventure that would make that my favorite in that kind of way.
Well, we have our first question. Mr. David Jones is asking, as a programmer, what interaction do you generally have with the operators for the run? Are you instructing them, or does that tend to be the SML, like the stage manager or lighting designer?
So there's a handover period where you'll say, hey, this is how I've set everything up. I mean, up until previews, the person who's going to be the operator for the run is around, but not running the console, although maybe coming in and doing the rig check, that kind of thing. So at a certain point, there's a handover of, hey, here's where everything is. Here's the stuff I've set up for various things to check this cue, that focus, all the rest of it. Do you want anything else? Do you have any questions? And then really, there's just one night when they're doing it. I mean, it's, there at some point, there's the night that I did it, and then there's now they're doing it. And then I would continue being the programmer for, hey, we're going to come in tomorrow. There's 3 hours of dark time. We're going to do lighting notes and cue touch-ups. I'll come in and do that kind of thing. And then be hands off for the run that night.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, speaking of the different roles, can you kind of take us through, for those who may not be as familiar with lighting, what are the different roles within the lighting team?
I think that's really dependent on if you're talking about theater or concerts.
Sure. Well, take us through theater first, if you
Okay,
don't mind.
sure. There is a There is a lighting designer, obviously, and then there may or may not be an associate designer who is there to be an artistic eye. So if the designer gets called away because they have to be in a production meeting with the director, or they have to go see a run through or something, the associate is someone who could carry on in the style of and keep working. And then there'll be an assistant lighting designer who is primarily concerned with paperwork, possibly calling focus, possibly interacting with the crew about notes, work notes, and this needs fixed, this needs changed. There is on a bigger, this is like a big production. There'll be a programmer who's going to be sitting behind the console, creating all the cues that the designer wants. And then, as someone mentioned, there will then be an operator who's going to do the run for the show, who may or may not be around in this process in another role. There will be a production electrician who's there overseeing the entire system working. And underneath that person will probably be anywhere from 3 to 6 other people who are possibly lead follow spot operator, calling follow spots. Maybe there's someone who's specifically there as a moving light technician. Maybe there's someone who's specifically there to be overseeing projectors if there's not a whole separate video team. There might be someone whose specialty is networking. So a little bit of specialization within that team. And then there's kind of more local hands, people who are going to, physically run up the truss and go focus. So less specialized, but a handful of people who are lighting stagehands, essentially. Did I miss anyone?
That sounds about right.
Yeah. Okay.
And then when you get to the concert world, who do we add to that roster?
Sort of, we take away some people.
Hmm.
So there's still a lighting designer. And one of the biggest differences is that unless it's quite a big show, there's a really good chance that the designer is out on tour as well every day. And there's no stage manager. There is a stage manager, but they do something completely different. There's nobody calling any cues. So then you, as the designer sitting behind the console, you are like in relationship with the band about, okay, we're doing this now. And there's no one else out there. It's
Hmm.
just you and the console and the audio guy. And the two of you are running the show from out there. But you might have a lighting director, which would be if I designed it, but couldn't go on the tour,
Hmm.
I would hire someone to come in as a lighting director who's going to have musicality and skill because they need to run the show live every night. But they also are going to need to program new songs if new songs come up.
Hmm.
Um, if they decide to add something to the set list, if they rearrange stuff, they need to be able to own it while keeping the original vision there.
Hmm. Yeah.
There might be a programmer who's just there for the pre-production period.
Hmm.
That's relatively unusual. It's not totally unusual, but
Big
often
show,
the
yeah.
LD is programming.
Mhm.
It's expected that you're able to program for yourself. And then there'll be a lighting crew chief who's kind of like the master electrician or production electrician who's in charge of making it all work and prepping it all and getting that thing up every day. And then a variety of people, again, with different specialties. There might only be a lighting crew chief and that's it. And the rest is local crew, or there could be a crew of, say, 6, 7, 8 people.
Well, great. Well, so Sharon, what have you been up to since March? Since what's changed in your world, and how are the events in the world today affected both your day-to-day operations and artistically? How has that affected your work?
Um, well, COVID's a drag. I think we can all agree on that. It's been especially hard on the live events industry. And one of the things that we're doing here is a strong pivot into virtual production. So I just had a student do his master's thesis on creating an extended reality stage with equipment that we had at CCM. So any of you are listening, the next thing y'all want to learn is Unreal Engine or another gaming engine, but Unreal is out there and it's free. So that's one of the big pivots right now is watching what people like J2 Rooney are up to, doing the MTV Video Music Awards, the recent Billie Eilish concert, if anyone caught that, or Katy Perry live American Idol. That was earlier this summer, but it's these things where live person is performing and being composited live into essentially a video game environment, but a video game environment that's been designed by show people. So I'm going to put you on a stage and I've decided it's on top of a mountain. And also we can spin around and there's some stuff behind me. And you as a singer are being live composited into that set. The set can change. Uh, so that is where we're all going. Not that it won't, I don't think it'll like stay only that, because of course we all want to hang out together and go see theater and go dancing and see concerts. But that is something that's here to stay, is really into extended reality, augmented reality, virtual reality, and looking at, okay, what are the levels of audience interactivity as well? I could see that once we come back live, are we giving everyone an iPhone and the capacity to draw something that then appears on the set live? Is there that level of, that would
Mhm.
be fun, no? That
Yeah.
would be really, really fun. So this is, it was something I was a little resistant about. I'm like, VR, I don't want to buy one of those stupid headsets, but now I'm all in. It's really exciting.
And so, how fast and how well, I'm not sure even how to ask it, but like, how did you go from programming a light board and working with physical fixtures to learning Unreal Engine and VR? Did that all start in March, or were you
Oh
already?
yeah, let me clarify. I do not know Unreal Engine, but
Okay.
several of my students have figured it out, and I'm pushing them hard in that direction. And I mean, one of the things in education that I've come to realize is the breadth of things that I would like to expose students to. It's no longer possible for one or even two people to know all of that. So I now look at, all right, here's all the software that I think you need to learn, be exposed to at any rate this year. I know maybe 3 of them, and I've set up training or connected you to the people, or we have a master class on the other ones so that there is someone to call, or you know how to get information about that. But honestly, none of this really, it's sort of quasi existed a year ago. Anyone who's doing the virtual production stuff started fooling around with it in March. And now like, whoa, it's exploding and everybody wants that because that's how things are happening right now.
Well,
So, I mean, there's the bonus of nobody's an expert. So we're all flailing around, just like, I don't know. Did you try that?
I honestly didn't even know what Zoom was until about March and April. So
right.
I get it. I do. We've got another question from David as well. Again, as you've traveled the world and moved between different types of performance, how hard is it to make sure you and the person bringing you in have the exact same understanding of what your duties will be?
Interesting. I've never run into a problem with that. So I'm not sure how good I am at answering that. But I also have a fairly forceful personality. So I wouldn't be afraid to just say, I don't want to do that. That's not my job. I'm not doing that. I would say a lot of them are pretty self-explanatory. Like if you're on a tour, you're carrying your rig with you everywhere you go. So you're setting your rig up everywhere you go. Like the job doesn't change whether you're in Taipei or Brazil. You still need to set your rig up and make sure that by sound check, that artist is going to walk on stage and it feels familiar, that it all, as much as possible, looks the same. And for the artists that I've done like many, many laps around the world with, that were not carrying a rig, they didn't have the money to take all the lighting with them, then we're using local equipment everywhere and advancing that through a promoter and through multiple layers of translators. My job never changes. My job is to make those people look good on stage and provide the audience with an emotional experience that I've translated visually. How I get to my job might be radically different, because if I'm in Russia with a chain smoking, grumpy Russian guy and a Kundalini yoga teacher as a translator, which is one of many, many translator stories, and there's a show tonight and it's some lighting console that someone made. I mean, it's not a brand I recognize, certainly. And it's like PC based, and there's Chinese knockoff moving lights that I wouldn't like, well, let's start with the easy questions. Can this turn blue? Duh. I'm like, okay, can you make it be blue? Like, you just start paring your job down to what are the essentials here? I need to see them. If worse comes to worse, where are the work lights? Okay, can we make the stage blue? Okay, great. Now we have like a vibe. Yeah. How about, can we make it blue and then can we make it red? Can that happen over a fade? Okay, now we're starting to have a show, right? So I'm not sure if that was the intent of that question or not.
Well, let me ask you this. So you are a IATSE member, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So some of the shows that you've worked on in the past and continue to work on, are you represented or do you find these positions through representation of an agent, or are you simply being, hey, I know a person.
The second, yeah, it's just me. I've never had an agent. I can't say I've ever gotten work because of IA. Mm-hmm. It enabled me to do Shrek without us having to process paperwork for me, because I could say, oh, I'm already a member of a local. I believe in them. Yeah, I think that's great. But any work I've gotten has been because of either me reaching out and really initiating, like, hey, I'd love to work for you. Or would you ever want a lighting designer? And some of those conversations have gone really, really well. Like, wow, yeah, we just decided last night we wanted to do that. Some of it has been persistence. I am to this day convinced that Cirque du Soleil hired me because they thought they knew me, but they didn't. I just sent them over 200 resumes.
Wow.
I am convinced that finally, after like a couple of years of that, finally they were around a table and they're like, that name is familiar. Yeah, I think I know her too. Okay. And then if you haven't heard this already, if 3 people in the room know your name without any bad association, you probably have the job.
I like
So it's you're your own ambassador all the time. And that's the best marketing there is. And I think our industry responds well to people putting themselves out there,
it. Hmm.
to saying, hey, I like what you're doing. I'd like to be part of it.
Hmm.
Our industry, everyone is so vulnerable. I can't even imagine what it's like to stand on stage and be a performer and sing to thousands of people. That is so exposing. And then as a lighting designer, I'm exposed too, but not as exposed as they are. But wow, if I screw up, and it's everyone's vulnerable. So everybody needs help. And I think it's easy to forget that like, um, Eddie Vedder has bad days and might like it if you're like, hey man, that sounded really great tonight.
That's it. That's it. That's all I needed.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, you've done some amazing concert work, theater work. You're an educator. You've also worked with corporate events. So, such as the North American Auto Show and even the inauguration of President Obama. Can you speak a bit about what that was like? What was it? Was there additional layers of security or anything else that you had to do when, helping make an inauguration happen?
Yeah. So I was working for Jim Tetlow, who was the overall designer for all of the balls. So the inaugural balls happen after the inauguration event that happens outdoors, and it's separated out by various states that are important to the president. So I was the lighting director for the home states ball, and I think there were probably 8 other balls happening that all needed to look exactly like that on TV, so that when networks were cutting from one ball to the other ball, they, it didn't look radically different. Um, and a few things really surprised me. One, there was a Secret Service person there who was in charge of lighting, and they had a light meter, and he would run up and say, okay, we need this many foot candles from the front, this many foot candles from the back. And I was feeling a bit judgmental. It's like, you don't know anything about show business. Like, get out of my face. But and then there wasn't really anyone like calling the show. We had Jack Johnson on one stage and Common on another stage, and we realized there's no like stage manager, and here that's the vice president. Somebody go tell Jack Johnson to stop playing. So I was actually on my phone with my master electrician saying, can you just tell them, like, cut the music? And weirdly, we ended up cueing that. That's another thing. If you're ever looking around and wondering
Oh yeah.
who's in charge here, it might be you.
Yeah.
And the same designer wise, if you're ever wondering, like, who's going to decide what this looks like, it's probably you. And don't be afraid of those moments. But this Secret Service guy, when we're still building, there was nobody on stage yet, I noticed they were putting up a barrier that was about like this, kind of like a ground row to hide cyc lights across the front of the stage. I was like, that's a bit weird. It's going to be weird for camera shots. We can't see anyone's feet. And so I asked him, what's that for? And he said, oh, it's a bulletproof barrier in case anyone shoots, the president can hit the deck behind it. And at that moment, I realized, oh, that's when you would know what to do. Yeah. And I would be hiding under the table crying. Got it. No problem. Wow. Totally happy you're in charge here. Yeah. And we had a really great conversation about all of that afterwards. Like, how do people react in situations like that, the kind of training. And they were scanning every light we hung for bugs,
really,
for explosives. Yeah, I mean, think about a moving light.
I mean, yeah.
Have you ever seen a more perfect cover for a bomb? It's just a mass of electronics and wires. So We opened up every moving light as it was loaded in, and hung stuff on trusses. And
Did you ever find out why he was looking for, or they were looking for the foot candles?
yeah, so I don't know historically where this happened, but at some point, so if you're looking at debates too, each candidate's going to have their own LD there. Because if you're watching that on TV and one person is a little bit darker, that has a psychological impact on everyone watching. And I can't say that I would be unbiased enough to not do that if I realized, wait a minute, I'm the lighting operator in this room and no one's checking me. I'm just gonna like lower the fader on the candidate I like a bit less. I mean, that's because maybe my ethics are in question here. So so each candidate will have their own LD who's going to walk in front and say this many foot candles from the front, this many from the back. That's what we're all doing. And then whatever else is going on in the room, fine. But and then that extends to, hey, TV networks, this is what we're always doing. And we all know this is going to look good. You can take great close-ups, and yeah.
Wow. Okay. And do you find, well, or can you speak a bit about the challenges or the benefits for lighting events that are filmed and lighting events that are not televised or filmed?
So to me, that's a totally different reality. I have no real, I can kind of fake it through lighting televised events. I mean, in this case, Jim Tetlow is a master at that. So he would just swing by. He'd already picked the color for front light. He was like, here's how it's going to work. He came in and focused the front wash with a light meter. I wouldn't say I have any real expertise in, you wouldn't call me to say, hey, can you make sure this looks great on TV? I can kind of fake it. But there are people like Alan Bratton, Jim Tetlow, Bobby Dickinson, who that's their gig. They are your insurance that thing is going to look amazing on television. And if it looks amazing on television, it probably doesn't look that great for the live audience. Cameras need more light than the human eye does to really see what's going on, to look good. If you're watching a live concert that's televised or on a screen, and you can see the audience, that means somebody has blasted a ton of light at that audience so that it looks great for us on the screen, but in the room, it's a bit bright, you know? And then also for anything on screens, everything has to be within a narrow bandwidth of relative brightness. So if we're designing something for the stage and I want you to pay attention to a particular actor speaking, I'm going to make them quite bright so that you look there. We can't really do that in TV because if they're really bright and the scenery is really not, either you're wildly overexposing the person or you can't see the scenery. So this is another thing that if you're watching something that's being created for television, you'd probably find the performers a bit dark. You think, oh, can't we bump that up a little bit? But on camera, it looks great.
Yeah, that's why you always see that TV sitting next to a design console.
Exactly, exactly. The very first thing I did that was televised, the camera crew got so irritated, nicely irritated. I was only like 22. And they actually came, and I came back from a break and they had turned my entire table around so that my back was to the stage and the monitor was in front of me. And they were like, you don't look at the stage anymore. I'm like, okay.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, as an educator in a field that is constantly changing, and especially with things that are going on now, where do you see the future of the lighting industry?
I mean, I can see the future like here. I can't see the future way ahead. I mean, the future right now is really, hey, let's keep going with the virtual productions and extended reality and augmented reality. I think that that's going to go in a bunch of directions that we can't even foresee right now, because as people are getting into it, we're realizing, oh, there's like a missing piece here, that this thing doesn't, you can't do this in a way that makes sense to showbiz people. I want to show up with a lighting desk and plug into a virtual system and just be able to program lighting. But that doesn't actually make sense in a video game environment. So everyone's discovering these little moments of, oh, someone's gonna soon, maybe one of you is going to invent all the things that are going to turn into the workflows that we all end up using forever. I don't know what's going to come out of that, but I know that it's not going to go away. It's going to get folded into what happens when live events really come back with audiences. And there's a lot of really smart people involved in it, and there's a lot of energy. So I have a feeling it's going to go places that, yeah, I can't even really see. That and interactive, where there's interactivity. If I move closer to something, something happens. Yeah.
All right. So I got to ask, I saw on your resume and on your website, you had built a tiny little house. Okay.
I
And that
did.
just like blew my mind. So I do want to ask, what got you into that, and what is a tiny little house?
So I think what got me into it is that I'm Dutch, and the Dutch are a large people who like to be in very small spaces. You ever get a chance to go travel around in Amsterdam, it's just constant, cute, cozy, awesome, tiny spaces. So I just got obsessed with tiny homes. I read an article after 2008 economic crash where this woman had built a tiny house on wheels. She said, I never want to have a mortgage again. I'm buying a truck. I built this house. It's on wheels. And that's what I'm doing. And I thought, oh my gosh, that is the like fun, cute. It kind of ticks some boxes about independence and about having a dollhouse, really, that you get to live in, or a treehouse, Swiss Family Robinson style. So I got into it enough that I started going to the workshops and ordering the books, which were all tiny, which I thought was very on brand. And then eventually I won a contest to go to a tiny house building workshop. And at the workshop, I was like, great, I'm going to buy one of those trailers. And once you bought the trailer, you have to build the house, because otherwise you just sit there staring at it and it makes you feel guilty.
And had you ever built anything like that before, or any construction work like that?
Yeah, I'd worked in scene shops.
Okay. Yeah.
So I knew how to use all the tools, but I can't say that I knew how to build anything that was going to last longer than 4 weeks. So that was an adjustment. And those tiny house, I bought plans from a company, Tumbleweed Tiny Homes, but those do not come with instructions. It was just drawings that half the measurements were wrong anyway, which a contractor or a carpenter wouldn't expect them to be perfect, but I didn't know. So there's a lot of crying, but it was also just an awesome experience.
Yeah, it looks so awesome. I mean, I'm like,
it was great. And the whole thing gets built with hurricane stuff, because you're going to drive it down the highway, and then there's side winds and you're going to brake. So there's all kinds of forces that you never see on a normal house unless they're in a hurricane. So every single joist had hurricane clips. Every joist was doubled up. No screws, because screws can break under stress. Nails will bend. Everything was glued. There was metal strapping run around the entire body of the house to cinch it tight. Yeah, all kinds of, so it's a lot of interesting stuff about hurricanes,
and did you
about
stay
forces.
at all, or like,
pardon?
Did you actually live in it, or stay in it, or camp in it, or?
I camped in it. I drove it from Canada down to Wyoming, about 1,200 miles, and we camped and went into RV parks, and that always got a good reaction. I mean, that thing was cute.
Yes.
It was just cute. Yeah. And then finally I sold it because I was moving to Europe, and I thought I was going to take it, but I realized that the road clearances in Europe are different. It was 4 inches too tall. The road clearances in Europe are 4 meters, which is 12 feet, and the house was 12'4" tall.
Oh my God.
So I sold it to a guy in Oakland who lives in it and loves it and sends me updated photos from time to time. He said it could be an open adoption.
Nice. Well, thank you for indulging me in that. That was just one of the
course.
Things. I'm like looking through, I'm like, wait, what is this? So
the next project is a teardrop trailer.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, maybe we'll have you back on in a couple of years, and we'll look at that one as well.
That sounds great.
Awesome. Well, Sharon, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight, and everyone out there, I want to thank you for joining us as well. And I hope you'll join me in saying thank you, Sharon. And I hope everything goes well the rest of the semester for you up at CCM.
Thanks so much. Likewise to all of you.
All right, take care.